Okay, it's Berkeley time, so let's get started. I hope your semester is going well so far and you guys are not too busy. If you haven't started on our homeworks yet, I highly suggest it so that you don't get behind for the rest of the semester. But yeah, let's get into it. Also, just to preface, do you guys have a strong preference whether or not, like, if we're doing a Python like coding example, whether or not I just show the picture of the solution, or do you guys want me to like actually type it out on my terminal? Type it out? Okay. If you guys like when I type it out and like actually think about it, raise your hand. Okay, cool. Yep, we're lovely. Hold on. Okay. Sorry about that. As will be recorded, just a quick overview, announcements. That's this. And we're going to do a quick warm up and then the usual review. Today is a discussion, and I think for future discussions, there's a couple questions that say like write it on a piece of paper. So if you don't have paper, just expect to bring paper in the future. But if you have like an iPad or something to write with, not a computer, that would be preferable. Actually, if you guys could just like close your laptops. Perfect, perfect. All laptops closed, please. Because it's mostly just gonna be like verbal or written today, or if you guys feel very strongly, you can write on the boards too. But yeah, and then for the coding examples, we'll just go through it with me, and then you guys can shout out whatever you think the answer is. Cool? Cool. So yeah, our review is going to be about functions, conditionals, and loops, and then we're going to have a couple example questions, and then we're all good. Okay, so today, homework 2 is due tonight at midnight. Like I said, if you haven't started on the homeworks, please start. They're a little bit lengthy, and it's a little bit confusing when you first start coding. So if you have any questions or concerns or weird errors, remember you can always come to office hours or email one of us. Homework 3 was released at the beginning of this week, and homework 3 is going to be due next week on Wednesday. Okay, so a quick little warm up. Like I said, I know it says piece of paper. How many of you actually have a piece of paper? Like raise your hand real quick. Okay. We'll just do this verbally then. So I'll give you guys like a good like 20, 30 seconds to talk about these with the people around you. But you're just going to go through like the 5 conditional expressions that we've already learned last class, what the expression is at the beginning of a function, the difference between print and return functions, what's an argument of a function, how do you import functions in Python, and then give an example of a for loop. Sound good? All right. Discuss for like a minute.
I don't remember. 那后面后面又
Okay, are we ready to discuss the answers? Cool. Okay, does anyone have any questions before we do? Cool. Okay, so the 5 conditionals we talked about are going to be if, elif, else, and or. And then the like defining expression of a function is going to be def, which stands for define. Print is going to be the output of a print statement. Sorry. Yeah, I said that correctly. And it can't be reused. So once you already use it, whatever's in there, prints once. And then return, the output can be used in other contexts. So you're basically just telling your function to evaluate something at that point, and that can be reused later on. What's the argument of a function? The input, so basically what goes inside the parentheses, you can leave that blank, but in terms of like good coding etiquette and somebody else reading your code later, it's going to be a lot easier if you define what should go inside those parentheses. And also, you can always just define a variable, put it in the parentheses. So if like I want to put a list through there, I can say my list is in the parentheses, and then above your function, you can set my list equal to whatever list you want it to evaluate. Are we cool with that? Cool. Okay. And then how do you import functions in Python? You call from file name, import your function name. So if I have some function that's, in my code, it says def, I don't know, fruits, parentheses, then you would say from whatever file name, probably your name. So my name's Katie. So from Katie, import fruits. Okay. And then the last one, an example of a for loop. So this is what I said. You have some list that's marked as list for some num in list. So for any number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, which is inside list, you print a number. Usually instead of number, we say I. So for I in list, it's basically just a placeholder variable so that your Python knows to iterate through every single number in list. Okay, cool. So going over a brief review of Monday's lecture, our print function, basically every time you have a function, it's going to start with def, so define, say hello, and then you want to enter a name. So if you're trying to, say hello when you log on to something and your code goes, hello, Katie, the following would be true. So you have your definition, say hello, your name, and when you call it, you would say hello, Katie, and then print hello, Katie. And like I said, arguments, you don't necessarily need to put any in there, but it is helpful. And it makes your code just like a little bit easier because you can always define that inside your function. Any variable that's defined inside your function is going to be a local variable, and you can't call it outside of your function. So it's going to be always set. In the case where you want to have a global variable inside a function, there's a command for that. But it gets a little bit tricky. So just remember where you define your actual variables, whether it's inside or outside. And then, yeah, you can have as many as you want, but the more variables that you start adding into a function that can be called, the more complicated it gets, because every time you call that function, you have to put that many variables and they have to be within the like given set parameters. So if your function can only take in a list and you put something else in there, then it's going to throw you an error and it's going to be a little bit more complex to use. Okay, so always after the parentheses, remember that it has to end with a colon. In this case, we're working with just a print function, so you can't use the output of this type of function. It's going to come back as a string anyways. And usually if you're doing like some sort of numerical analysis, it's not convenient to use. Okay, so an example of not having a result, would be if if you're importing a function from here and you're saying from functions, which is going to be your file name, import add, which is your function that you've already written, add with the inputs 2 and 3. So like if you were writing that function, it would be add x comma y. Then when you run your Python, it's going to give you back 5. But when you set it as a variable, result equals add 2 comma 3, it still equals 5, but if you try to print that result, it's not going to register that it's an actual integer, and it's not going to print because it's saying result is a variable with some sort of nested information. And if you're trying to print that, then there technically is no information that result is. It's like a placeholder name. Does that make sense? Are we good with that idea? Okay. And if you're ever curious and something like this is happening to you, you can always use the type function. So like this is a really common in debugging or something like that, where if you're trying to add two numbers and it's throwing you an error and it's saying invalid syntax or something, not syntax, but invalid type or something like that, then you can do type of whatever, type of 2 or 5 or type of result, and it's going to come back as a variable. Okay, your return function. So it states with the same defining statement. In this case, the function is named add, and we have 2 arguments. Like I was saying, this time it's just A and B. Always ends with a colon. Don't forget that. That'll really mess you up, especially if you have a lot of code. I'm sure you guys have already experienced that. And then your return statement is just going to simply return that value when your code is called. It's not necessarily going to print it. Okay. Any questions so far? Cool. I know it's 4 p.m. on a Wednesday. I'm tired too. Okay, moving on to if, elif, and else statements. So if we're working with our check number function, then we're going to work in the if, elif, and else statements. So it always goes if, elif, and else. Elif is going to be if you want to specify some second statement. So if is going to be your initial statement. If you have multiple, you can keep doing as many elifs if you want, but it always has to be in the order of if, elif, or else. If you don't have a like secondary condition, you can just do else. But you can think of it in kind of numbered conditions. So if you want your first priority, your broadest condition, then you would start it with your if. If you want to do, excuse me, a second like smaller category, like if something is really, let me think of an example. If something is like time sensitive per se, right? You would do it at X time. This is when I want it to happen. But if it happens at a secondary time, then I want to check that right after. And then if it doesn't happen at either of these 2 times, determine a different outcome. Does that make sense for everyone? Okay. So that's when this is really useful. You really want to think about the order of things because it can kind of mess you up. I think there is an exponent question in the homework where the order kind of matters if you're going to get really into the weeds of it and do, if it equals 0, if it's a negative exponent, if it's a positive exponent, or whatever. Okay, so if the first statement is true, then the function is going to stop there and it's going to end, and then it's going to immediately go to the return statement at the very end of it, and it's just going to spit out true. Otherwise, it's going to keep checking all the rest of them. That's why it's really important. If you want your broadest statement, whatever you want to be checked first has to go at the top. And then after that, it's kind of like a waterfall of like importance. Okay. And then moving on to and statements, you need both conditions to be true if and is to come back true. So if for our can vote function, if your age is over 18 and you are a citizen in the US, then you can vote. Otherwise, if you don't qualify for both of those, say you're 17 but you're a citizen, you can't vote, or maybe you are over 18 and you're not a citizen, then you can't vote. So that's when the if and else statements like individually come in, because else just catches everything else. Pretty self-explanatory when you put it like that. Or the or statements, and you only need one condition to be true. So if you're wondering if it's a weekend and you want your code to check that, so if you want to know if some, restaurant is open or something like that, and they're only open on the weekends for some reason, if your day is equal to Saturday or your day is equal to Sunday, then it's the weekend. Otherwise, it's not the weekend. It's pretty straightforward. And remember that the double equal sign means true. So that's going to return a Boolean value, which is either going to be true or false. So if you did type of like Saturday or Sunday, it's going to return a Boolean value because it's only ever going to tell you true or false. It's not going to tell you like, yes, it's Saturday, yes, it's Sunday. Those statements by themselves can only ever be true or false. Did you guys have any questions on the like double equals, exclamation equals, plus equals stuff? Was that covered in lecture already? I'm seeing both. What's up? Okay, so exclamation equals. I think that's, what is that again? Not equal to? Yeah, so this is going to be also a Boolean statement. So this is false. Or yeah, because this is the same as writing the strike through like equal sign. Okay, does anybody have any questions on like the format? Like if I write like plus equals or something like that, is it clear what that equation means? Okay, cool. Okay, moving on to for loops. Okay, so they're useful for repeating segments over and over again in your code. So like a real life use of this would be iterating through a lot of data. If you have thousands and thousands of like rows and columns, you're going to want to have to iterate through each of those. Like if you're looking at a galaxy or if you're looking at a bunch of like supernova data or something like that, and you want to figure out which ones specifically are type 2 versus type 1, you would have to analyze all of the elements in them, and then you have thousands of stars that you've been looking at and data that you have to parse through. That's where this is really, really powerful because you can have nested for loops and stuff like that and check a lot of different conditions. So that being said, they're useful for, sorry, I already said that, but we have a print function here and you can't reuse its output. So once you already type print, that's it. It's just going to spit that out every single time when you call this function. Okay, so for example, if we're calling from our functions again, our print fruits function, what we're doing here is we're setting our input as a list because we don't already have one, we just have the function, and print fruits takes in some sort of list that we're going to call fruits, and we define it here. So we have apple, banana, and cherry. And then if we want to call the function, we just say the name and then whatever input we want. So in this case, it's print fruits, and we're putting in fruits into it, and then it's printing fruits. I know that's a lot of printing in fruits, but does that make sense? I know the naming convention could have been a lot better on this one. It's kind of confusing, but like if you take another function, if you say apples, for example, and you put a bunch of different types of apples in there, it would be the same thing. So you could have like Gala, Granny, and some other type of apple. Okay, so moving on to while loops. It's kind of similar, but they're good when you need something to happen until a condition is met. These are also where you run into infinite loops a lot of the time. So if you're running your code and it's taking forever and you've been sitting there for 5 minutes and it still hasn't put out an output, it's probably because your computer is confused and it's probably iterated through it like thousands of times already. So in that case, Control X, but moving on. It basically prints out your countdown number until we hit 0, and then it prints liftoff. So if you want to set a timer, this is how timers work on a really basic scale. If you go to Google and you type in timer, this is what it's doing. It's just adding it every single time until you click stop. Okay, are we cool with loops and everything that I've discussed so far? Awesome. Okay, moving on to practice questions. Okay. Let me think about this for a second. I think what we're going to do, since we don't have paper today, let's just discuss what you would do for these two functions. And note that it doesn't say you can't use the min or max function, because I know one of your homework questions is that. So just discuss with the people around you how you would code this out, like discuss the logic of how you would write this function, things to note when writing a function, your defining statement, your name, your input, how many input variables you want to take, what type of input variables do you want to take? Do you want to take an integer, a string, a list, a dictionary? Discuss that. And then use that list or, I'll do the example, so don't worry about that part. But yeah, just take like 20 seconds to discuss that real quick. Go for it.
这不是本来这个拍上哦，就写了，我看看这I have a problem passage, so not passage, but it's there. I do that.
Oh. Okay. Sounds like we're good to go. So there is a picture on the slides, but oh, that's quite small. Also, if it makes anyone feel better, I was in office hours and I have no idea what I did to my computer, but I opened my terminal and now it's broken. So I haven't had the time to decode it, but hopefully that makes you feel validated because it happens to us too. And I unfortunately have a Windows. Anyways, if we're gonna make a function, what's the first thing that you need to write down? Just shout it out. Cool. Perfect. So def, and then we want to have a smart name for our function. So something that's descriptive, but not horribly wrong. So minimum value. And then what do we want to take in? Like what's the variable that we want to take in? Yep. Perfect. A couple of notes just about this. Both your function name and whatever input you put inside of it, you have to be careful with your name that you put it because sometimes in like VS Code and whatnot, list will actually mean something and it's going to be defined somewhere else. And then it's going to call a different list and it's going to give you the wrong answer. So sometimes what we do is we put like my list or list and then one. Or like you can name it like random numbers or something like that. So whatever it is, just make sure you're consistent with it. Okay, so what do we think we want to put here? Like we want to find the minimum of lists and we're allowed to use the min and max functions. So what should I write? Yeah.
Return min list.
List one. Yeah, that's basically it. And that'll do what we want it to. Let's run it. So here's another thing. I don't know which instructors do what for how they code. Everybody has their different preference. My preference is to run my VS Code file in my terminal every single time because I think the VS Code terminal is evil and it throws an error every single time for me. It just doesn't work. So you have to make sure you save your file. So what did I name it? Cool. And then I have to put it in the right spot, which is also a huge thing. Please keep your computers organized. That'll save you so much time. I say that as I'm struggling to find where to put it. It's been a long day, guys. Okay, cool. So Control S. Go back to my Git bash terminal, which is conveniently working. I just like to type in ls every time if I'm trying to find a function or if I'm trying to find a folder, just so that I know where I'm at. My course is called Astro 98 because I'm quirky, I guess. LS. Your guys' path is gonna look completely different. Don't worry about it. Okay, so if I want to run it, Python 3, I couldn't have chosen a longer name for this. And there we go. I get no output. Do we know why? Yeah, I didn't print it. It's devastating. So we can return, print. Cool. Run it again. You can push the up arrow and then just hit enter and it'll run the code again and it's not going to print it because I put it within the return statement. Uh, it's still not going to print it. That's lovely. Does anyone have any idea why it wouldn't be printing? Oh, yes. Thank you for saying that. Nope, that wasn't it. Hmm.
You never actually called the function.
Ah, I've had 2 coffees today and it's still not enough. Okay. Okay. I hope that was also validating to watch me do this because I've been doing this for 3 years now. Cool. It printed 10. Lovely. That is the minimum value in this function. Remember to call your functions. Okay, next one. Hopefully a little bit easier. Maximum value, list one, colon. We'll do return this time. Now what? What should I put for maximum value? Yes.
You have to put a one.
Oh, lol. Thank you guys. Cool. No, I do not want the minimum value. Okay, calling it print. There we go. Maximum value is 80. Does that make sense? We cool with that? Cool. Um, did you guys see what I did here with highlighting it and commenting it out? Do you guys know how to do that? Cool. Control forward slash. What's up?
Why did you add a return in the second? Not first.
Like because I felt like it, but you don't need it. They're kind of interchangeable. It's technically good coding etiquette to always have a return statement. It's just that if you want the return output, like the return basically says your function is over. So technically the first one is unfinished and I should put return whatever output because if you're calling that function within another function, you don't always necessarily want to print that internal output because you're going to be using it within another equation. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So it's basically just so that Python knows that the function is over. What's up?
If you have like return next list one, will it save the value as an integer versus like return print next one? Does that save it as a string instead?
No, so print is gonna print whatever value. It's just gonna print whatever type it is. So yeah, actually that's a good point. If we want to do print type max list, we can do that as well, and it's gonna tell me it's an integer. Yeah. So if that was a string, which you can make it a string, like if you made each of these individually strings, then it would return that it's a string, I believe. Let's find out. Yeah, so it's a string, even though it's an integer. I think I mentioned this a couple lectures ago, but this is really important, especially when you're parsing through data and somebody else stored that data, you don't know what they stored it as. So that's really important to check. Okay, any questions so far? We good? Cool beans. Let's move on. Okay, there's the solution. Cool. Another practice question. The function on the left is terrible and evil. Look at it. Does anybody know what's happening in this without reading the other side of the screen? Because I looked at that like 20 minutes ago and I didn't know what was happening. But basically, if you are given a character and it's a letter, the function within itself is alpha, checks if it's a letter. It's called is alpha because it checks if it's alphabetical, quote unquote, which basically just means it's checking if it's a letter in the English language. So that's cool. With the people around you, I already spoiled it. Never mind. Sorry. Lol. But what's the purpose of the for loop? Discuss like for 10 seconds, please. Go crazy.
我戏里面有没有对数字没有？高的数字在里面。你想问一下，他映射要保留这个，因为他要这个是第一海是，他找出来他的来是一个，然后造出来也然后这个你现在在搞的是什么？这一代好像有出来什么？
Okay, we're gonna move on. I hate looking at this function and it's ugly. So basically, if we're checking, and our function is CL, which stands for check letters. But if you're somebody new and you're looking at this, you're not gonna know that, which is why it's a terrible name. Don't do that. And you're checking T, God knows what T is. If C equals 0, for CH in T, so for some character that's in T, and T is your word, if it is alphabetical, then you're going to add 1 to C. So C is going to be your counter. I'm guessing that's why it's called C. And then every time you want to iterate through each individual letter in whatever word you have, you add +1 to your counter. And that has to be specifically outside of your loop. Otherwise, you're going to reset it to 0 every single time. And then you're going to have a word, say, supercalifragilistic, that one. And it's going to come back as like 20 letters or something. Except it's going to say 0. And it's definitely not 0. Okay? And then you want to do your return function. And if you called this function, it wouldn't even spit out anything because you have a return, not a print. And then your word really has no letters. Okay? It's a terrible function. I'm even a little angry looking at it. And I'm not even in presentation mode. Nobody told me. So yeah. How would you make it more readable? Discuss for like 10 seconds so that I can drink water. Go.
我唯一能想到的就是韩国语吧，它是帮助这个上面是
Okay. I will give one more PSA that please close your laptops. It's a discussion. You're supposed to be discussing, not screenager-ing. Okay. And I've already complained enough about this function, so let's move on. This is how I would fix it. Okay, so you have your definition, your defining statement, a better name, count letters. Yay! I know it's more annoying to type out, but trust me, if you're somebody reading somebody else's code, you'll love them for this. Text, lovely. I love when text is a word, okay? Count. Count equals 0. Like I said, for some character in text. If character is an alphabetical letter, then you add to your count and you return your count and then you print it and life is good. The world has color again. Everything is great. Okay, moving on to the next question. Does anybody have any questions about that? By the way, are we all cool with the coding etiquette and everything? Perfect. Okay, so in theory, if we had paper and it wasn't 2025, you would write a function that uses a while loop to print numbers from 1 to 10. But instead, we're going to do that on my computer, and you guys can yell at me or make very intense eye contact until I call on you. So let's do that. So does anybody have a good name for this function? Okay, counting. Perfect. What do we want counting to do? Like, what would the input be?
This.
Well, not necessarily, because our function is just counting to a number, right? I guess, okay. My example is left blank. This is one that you can leave blank. But if you want to count to some number, then we'll just do number. Okay? Oh, sorry, guys. Okay. Okay. So like the previous example, what would we want to put in the first line if we're going to count to some number using some sort of loop that goes for a definitive amount of time? Yeah.
Add a counter.
Yes. So what should we call the counter?
Count.
Sure. And we'll set it to 1. Yeah. 1 is going to be correct. Okay. In this case, what loop should we use? A while loop or for loop? While? Okay. And while your counter is what? Less than or equal to, we're counting to 10. So 10, colon, for funsies, so that Python doesn't scream at you. And then what do we want to do while it's counting? Do we want it to print every single time or like? Yeah.
Add 1.
Yes. Thank you. Okay. So we're going to print our counter. And then we're going to say, gosh, counter plus equals 1. Cool? And then that's basically it. Oh, gosh. And then run it, and it doesn't print anything. That's cool. Thank you. Gosh. Okay. So clearly I can read and type today. Okay. No. What?
This is entirely intentional. We're testing all.
Yeah. Honestly, all on purpose. I'm just that cool. So we never called number, and I don't really feel like going back and changing it so that we can call number. So we're gonna do that. And everything is already defined inside this function, which is why you don't really have like a input value. If you wanted to, you could say, actually, you know what? No, we'll put number back. Sorry. Number, and then we'll do if it's less than number, and then we'll call it as 10. Is everybody cool with that?
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, lovely. I remembered to call the function. Yay. Thank you. It's been a long day. Yeah, that's basically it. Are we all cool with that? Nobody's like breaking down about that? I would, considering how this lecture has gone. Okay, moving on. There's the really simple, easy solution. That was painless. Okay, question. Answer the following. And I'm going to write the function again because, that's cool. Write a function that returns true if a number is a multiple of 3 or 5, or otherwise returns false. So let's go back to this. And we're going to write another function. And we're going to say it is multiple of 3 or 5 because I like typing really long names. And then we're going to say some number. We'll call it n. Sure. And then what do we want our statement to be? If. Do we want to do an if statement or do we want to compact it into something a little bit more streamlined? Because you can do this in one line, but we could write an if statement if you want to do that. A for loop? I would say we could even you can do this in one line. Like you can write return and then you can write a statement. So this has to, I'll give you guys a hint. It has to do with booleans and your and or statements. So if we wanted to find out if something is a multiple of 3 or 5, we have a symbol to do this.
And mod 3 equals 0.
You could return if the number divided by 3 or 5, or modulus 3 or 5 is.
Yep. And then you want to do it twice. So if n mod 3 is double equal to 0, and note the double equals because a regular equals just means you're assigning a variable, or n is mod by 5, double equals to 0. Does that make sense? And I've learned from my past mistakes to call the function. Call that neuroplasticity or whatever, if I could type. Good grief. Okay, so what number do we want to do? 4. Okay, there's... Oh. Oh, God. I'm not locked in. Okay. Me when I don't print. Okay. Cool. False. Yes. 4 is not divisible by 3 or 5. Thank God. Okay. We can also try 15 for funsies. Okay. What if I wanted to test multiple numbers at a time? Do we think that's going to work? Definitely not. We would have to make it so that it takes an n and another number, but the cool part about this is that if you wanted to test it multiple times and run multiple numbers through it, you could make yet another function, put this one inside that function inside a for loop, and then call it again. We all comfortable or uncomfortable with that? Lovely. That's good. Back to the lecture. Okay, another painless screenshot of it. Coding is painful, guys. It's terrible. Okay, lecture engagement, yada yada. We've all done it. Bonus content. That's for you guys to discover, not for me to talk about. That's it. Go home.